This is literally 100 years old, and it's funny because the guys are always telling me to react to contemporary videos, and I'm like, this is the anti-contemporary video. Only the pretty hardcore mold maker types are going to get through this. It's a slow video, we'll speed it up for you, but I think it's fascinating to compare processes from yesteryear to this year. So let's get going. So if you've never seen a bronze built or know anything about bronze being built, this is actually a little bit more than just the bronze. They're going to give some love to the sculptor. And at the time, remember, this is after World War I. So war, battle, courage, fortitude, all these things were incredible values of that day. And because it was fresh, there was a lot of trauma following those years. We've done a couple horse molds in our day. A little trophy. The trophy horse mold that I did, it was too heavy for the woman presenter to carry it out into the arena because her shoes were sinking in the sand. So they had me made a lightweight of the, I'll show you a picture of that. All right, here we go. It was too heavy for her to carry, so they wanted a lightweight hollow casting. This is gonna get maximized here. So traditional. Yeah, pointing up these days is okay. So this process has been pretty much pointed up already. There's two point ups. One was what's called the maquette. That's the clay sculpture that you saw. That's kind of what the artist would make to a presentation to a committee, and then it would get approved, and then they would make this larger scale here. However, this large scale is then going to get pointed up one more time. So they're doing 2 points here. There's a lot of work between the two steps. Love it. Yeah. So what he's doing right now is he's building an interior armature. He's going to point up one piece at a time. And man, this is how they did it in the old days. So I only did a little bit of bronze work, and I was not involved in too much of the pointing up at any foundry. I just became aware of the process. We have a fly today. And foundry work is really not easy. It's stressful too. This part I like. You don't see that very often. You see people building armatures out of aluminum wire. And if that aluminum wire were just expanded and then you put this, he's using horsehair or sisal or hemp. He's dipping it in plaster, and then he's creating this plaster shell. So much easier than going right to a clay layer. I don't know why more people don't do this. You have to be really good on your original shape, because once you have that plaster, if you need to subtract, he's going to add clay on top of this. And if he needs to subtract clay from the plaster, it's hard to bust through the plaster. So you got to really know to underbuild that plaster. Did you read it 6 times already? Okay. This is fascinating to me. These are all points of reference. So you got to remember that this artisan right here, it's not his sculpture, but it is. He has to sculpt this with himself aside. He has to honor the original vision of the, I forget the guy's name, who made the maquettes. So he's a really, really talented three-dimensional printer. So he sealed the plaster, and he's just maxing it out with soft clay. It takes a lot to move that much clay, if you think about it. This is the original sculptor, and in the pointing up process, there's a lot of back and forth. There's the people that will, at the foundry, who are very talented sculptors, they'll get it really close, and then the artist, depending on the level of interaction, will come back and forth to do their touch-ups. Okay, there's a lot of time that passed. This is a couple months. I wonder where they showed this video. Like, who watched it in the day? I don't know. Okay, so if you look right here, this is an aluminum shim that they're putting in. They're doing it over here too, around the tail. These are all the mold sections that they're gonna make, and it's gonna be everywhere, up around the arm. It's gonna be real difficult in here. There's gonna be multiple pieces around the head. So these guys are gonna make like 20 or more mold sections out of plaster. Attilio. Master mold maker is what they're saying here. Oh, brass. Oh, aluminum brass. So if he didn't know how to divide this horse into so many sections, basically they're going to have these 20 pieces of plaster on this horse, and if it wasn't done right, they can't get them apart because they lock together. It's tedious. Oh, what am I doing? It's weird to see color images come into this old film. Expert Italians. I love it. So these guys are suiting up because it's about to get messy. Yeah. Very theatrical. That's a beast. And they're doing all the pieces at the same time. It's like, let's count these sort of, you know, oh shit. This is, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 20 on this side. So it's about 40 pieces that they got going. Come on. I mean, these guys just had to climb around on it, and there were much bigger statues being done in the day. Okay, it's time to reinforce. A couple thousand pounds of plaster. So if this mold isn't reinforced, it'll warp and distort, and they're going to be putting it back together, so it has to be rigid. Oh, we're at the finish point already. Now they're taking the mold sections off. I wish they had a wider shot. I think in 22 they were filming like this, right? They were hand turning the... and made ready. Yeah, take it apart. So in the foundry process, there's build, destroy, build, destroy. And if you make a mistake along the way of something you've destroyed, you're really in trouble because you can't go back and get this stuff. You have to have it moving forward correct. So it's a big deal. So it's a waste mold, but they're going to be making plaster castings of this. I love that. I mean, just killing it. They probably worked 14 hours a day. Okay, so what's happening now? You saw them take the plaster molds off of the clay horse. You saw them extract the clay from the horse. There's a little bit of mystery here about what's happening with the armature inside because they leave a few gaps in the story. I'll try to fill in some of them, but I myself am trying to figure out a couple pieces. Now what they've done is they've taken each mold section and they've put in soap into the plaster so it won't stick. We have a video of a guy making a waste mold, and it's a similar process. And then they take all these pieces that have been laid up with plaster inside and they begin to reassemble them. What you don't see is them going inside of the horse and connecting all these pieces together. But that's what's happening. They're basically taking a piece of plaster and reconstructing this shell and joining it from the inside. So you're about to see a big gap in the workflow here. I mean, he's done with it. It's going in the trash. Okay. So what you didn't see is probably another month's worth of work where they took the waste mold off and they have this big messy plaster casting. And in that plaster casting, they're dividing the pieces again, and they don't show that, where you'll see the head fitting into the torso here, and there's a fitted collar around that piece. And it was made in the plaster model process, and they don't show it because this horse has to come back together in pieces because each one of those pieces is going to be cast separate in bronze. So there's a little bit of mystery. I just think it was hard to have a camera crew there over this months and months. But it's looking pretty stylish. I mean, they made molds of the sword. I mean, if you think about that, these are plaster rigid molds. It must have been more than 40 pieces, way more. Had to get under the horse and the belly, unlock those pieces. I've done horses before. Anything with legs is tricky because you got to get under them. Okay, this is the collar that I was talking about. That got built in the model section. I'm not quite sure how they did that so nicely because what it looked like is they just kind of put it together. You also notice the tail is already off, and this guy is basically standing inside of the horse right here. And you can tell if they're using block and tackle that plaster probably weighs 300 pounds. It is a beast. But this piece right here is going to be one of the places how they join, when it's in bronze, how they join it back together, because they didn't weld in these days. They soldered, and you're going to see that those sculptures had to be pinned together with these bronze pins and then soldered. And if they didn't have a big surface, that solder would not hold. You'll see it coming up. It's madness. Beautiful, talented madness. Yeah, going in, it's like a Sherman tank. Working on ladders is hard. I did it for a few jobs, and we'll show some pictures of this big sculpture I did. My legs were so tired. So you can see right here, that wooden armature that was used for pointing up was recycled. So this is how they created this thickness in plaster. This is going to be molded again, and I'm in a little bit of a mystery of how that was controlled so nicely, but it doesn't, I mean, what can I do? I wasn't there. You know, it's interesting, all the guys that did this work and all the guys' dads that did this work, right, were 100 years ago. Those generations are, the information is diluted. For 1 year after I closed my first business, I worked for a company called Girolami and Sons, I think. And the last brother, Girolami, was working there at that time, and he was in his 80s, and he had this old plaster shop. And it was a shop responsible for doing a lot of the plaster ornamentation in Chicago for 100 years. I have some pictures of that shop, so it's, we're going to upload those. I know sometimes in the videos I say, oh, I have a picture I'm going to show you, but here's the deal. I have tens of thousands of pictures that I took over my career, and it's not always easy to access them at the rate which Kay and Pasha are editing. So sometimes I promise a little too much, but let's get back to the beauty of this horse. You can see it's this elegant equestrian puzzle. Look how the legs notched together. You'll also see down here at the bottom that the feet sit in nicely. That is a big pony. I think the guy on the right is the sculptor again. All right, here we go. Pieces and parts. Gigantor. This is the fancy. All that was re-added. Oh, I love these old trucks. Man, it looks like France. New York City. They didn't even wrap it. They just threw it on the truck, and probably there was 4 guys in the back holding it down. Do you see that old table? You see this? Look at this. Wait, let me go back here. Okay, right here. People are making coffee tables out of these now in their lofts because they had these. They used to move around these old sculptures and industrial things, and what was a piece of shit to these guys is now a fine piece of furniture to a lot of people. It's amazing what 100 years does, and it brings value. The fact that it survived for 100 years and it's imbued with these craftsman vibes, you know.
I think they dropped the door to fit these old sculptures through this tiny entrance.
Where, this door here?
Yeah, I think they dropped it because it
looks
like
right here,
side.
yeah.
They removed it so they can take it out.
Man, I had a big shop for a while, and the only thing that restricted me was what scale of work I had to do based on what fit through the door. You know, some people would order machinery, and we did that one time. We ordered machinery, and when it arrived, it couldn't be taken apart into small pieces. We had to take out a piece of wall, and we had to get a forklift to put it. Oh, it was terrible. It was like, oh my God, I'm never ordering from China again. Look at this. This is great. It reminds me, look at it. There's some guy's just standing back there. He's got some blankets. Love it. Another Italian guy. Look at this. He's a fancy guy. Looks like a lawyer, right? Okay. That's courteous of it. Yeah. I'm going to explain this in a minute. Okay. So there's a mold making process called a blanket mold. It involves, let's say that horse head. You have the horse head, and then you would put a blanket of clay around the horse head, so it would increase the size by about maybe an inch in this instance. And then they'd put plaster back around that, a 2-piece plaster mold just to keep it simple. Once that plaster is set, they take this plaster apart and they peel out all the clay. And then they put it back together, the plaster. Now what remains is this gap in between the plaster and the horse head. And then they're going to pour, we use silicone now or urethane, they use gelatin, and they're going to pour this big, heavy rubber mold around it because they couldn't brush apply molds. They had to pour them. And if you look right here, you can see all the vent holes for when they poured it, because when you pour a liquid into a mold, the air has to escape. And you wouldn't know if the gelatin has flowed to the bottom of the mold unless that, what's called a weep, unless that weep hole filled up and then they capped it off. So you can do some forensic mold making here by seeing these pieces. But look at this, 3 dudes to lift this piece, and they're all working. You can see the horse model here, and this is the mother mold, and then there's a liner you're about to see. That's the blanket mold, the liner. Beast. This is a big gelatin mold. It's probably, 100 pounds. I didn't know that you could use gelatin for wax because I thought gelatin was you make gelatin with heat. But what I want you to see is you see all these strings here. These strings are called tiebacks. And what happens is when they're just going to flop this blanket into the plaster mold. But if you stood that mold up, the blanket's going to collapse. And those tiebacks are like stitches, and they pull the mold to the plaster mold, and then the string goes outside the plaster mold and they tie it off. And so it kind of holds it in place. And there's registration keys in there too, but that's all they could do. I put tiebacks in some of my molds, but it's neat to see how they did it a long time ago. Yep, big piece. You see, when they flip this over, if it didn't have tiebacks, that whole mold would collapse. That's hundreds of pounds. See, but they're not going to put it together yet. So what you're looking at right here is you have mother mold, you have all these registration pieces here, you have gelatin right here, and then what he's doing right there is adding wax. The first layer of wax you brush in, and then because there's all these high points here, you have to put modeling wax on top, make a paste out of it. At least they did in these days. Because you have to build up they're creating, everything that they build in wax is now going to become bronze. So if they have a thin spot in wax, it's going to be a thin spot in bronze. They don't want that. It's got to be a little bit beefy, probably ½ inch or more in some places. Again, I'm not a bronze guy. I've been around it. I've poured bronze. I've made molds for bronze, but it just wore me out. So what's happened now is they've brushed in both halves of the horse head, and they're putting it together. You can see all of the tiebacks here holding this in place. You can see they make handles for handling the mold. They're going to put this together, and now they got to seam it so the two halves come together. And that's typically done by pouring wax in and rotating it. These days we have a lot more flexibility in doing it, but you'll see how they rotated a mold. It's not easy. Kazinga. Look at that. Oops. This is a lot of wax. So this is actually quite dangerous. This amount of wax can splash and things like this. I don't think they use the word danger the way we do. I mean, if you even think about it, old tin toys for kids were sharp and they would just cut your hands. Well, in those days, you just told a kid, be careful, you're gonna cut yourself. These days, it's like, that toy comes with a warning and like direct connection to the police. Even bags, they don't put them on your head. It's crazy what we do today for the legal system. So anyways, you got me monologuing.
You sly dog! You got me monologuing! I can't believe it.
Now they're pouring this mold. You can see over here they have these supports. They got to take the weight. They're going to tie it up pretty soon. They're not going to keep this solid. No way. Okay, so he's adding on a pouring feature for this that'll be used in the wax. Here's your tiebacks again. I'm not quite sure what's happening here. This is the bottom of the mold. I don't know what's going on here. Tell me, somebody. Okay, this is them, I believe, their version of rotational casting, because that wax has to be moved around somehow. I don't think I think that's what's happening. I just don't have a lot of film to go on. Okay. Oh, that's what he was making. This is interesting. He foresaw that this mold has to sit a certain way, so he was maybe building a post. I don't know. I'm guessing now, you guys. I'm at a loss here. Okay, the mold goes away, pretty cool. That gelatin, man, I don't know how it survives. I think the history of mold making went, for flexible, it went agar, which I think this is actually, it's not gelatin, agar. Then it went to latex. Then it went to, I think, urethane, and then silicone. Yeah, man, this is a reel on molding too. They didn't like do it for the camera. Oh, this is funny. So this guy here is wearing a newspaper hat. And when I was working at Girolami, Charlie, the last living brother of Girolami, he used to make those hats all day. And I asked him, and he goes, oh, just keep my hair clean. And I thought, well, whatever. Remember, how many bathrooms do you have in your house? You got a lot. And these days, a daily shower was not necessarily possible. So washing your hair, it meant something to stay clean. These are the things you don't think about, you know, the hygiene. They would come in, put on their work clothes, get cleaned up, and then leave. Wow. So what you haven't seen is, again, another couple months. And these wax castings and the amount of hand construction for the glasses and all sorts of things. Glasses are tough because the bronze doesn't flow. A lot of times they're cast separately. You can do a lot of surface treatment on this, torching it down. This is where we would put in sprues and gates. They're putting in these pipes because they got to drain. The wax has to exit the investment mold now because they're going to mold it again. Here's what's happening. So you have this is all wax right now, this beautiful horse, and you see all these pieces here. What you haven't seen in the film is there's an interior to this wax. It's called the core. And these core pins have to go through the wax head into the center of the hollow wax where there's a core in plaster also. And they have to connect all three layers, core, wax, and plaster mold, because eventually it's going to be melted out, the wax is going to be melted out, and the core, which makes the horse head hollow, is going to be just floating there. It has to be stabilized. So these are core pins. And now they're making an investment mold out of plaster. Incredible. It's probably got a ratio of silica, sand. What did he just do? It's like he lit it. You know, the fireproof material that they had back then, I think, was asbestos or something else, probably not great. But you see that they've created all of this stuff here. These are wax. This is where they're going to pour the bronze in. It's such a small opening, and you got to be really targeted if that's the case. And now they have the plaster detailed mold around, and now this mold here is the investment. This is what's going to hold the heat so that the mold doesn't split apart. Today, in the ceramic shell investment casting, the ceramic shell is from this thick to this thick. They're doing it like this. It's incredible, the amount of refractory that they had to build, this mortar. I mean, how many pounds is that sucker? Thousands. And do you notice in the shop, oh, let me get to a picture. Oh boy, that's a long one. In the shop, there's no kids. I mean, this is skilled artistry here. There's not even teenagers. These guys they're back from the war. They're, you know, and they're in 30s and their 40s, and it's a big deal. These are talented people. Now he's bricking up an oven around the mold, and that oven is a waste oven. They're going to build it and tear it down. But what they're doing now is they're melting the wax out of this investment mold. So you have the horse head in here, and that oven melted out the wax. I love those knots. So when they're filming, they have a big light shining on them, so the camera's picking this up. Could you imagine how dark that foundry was? This is why old factories had a wall of windows, because they didn't have a lot of electric lights. They had to, you know, they worked according to how long they could see. Okay. Well, you read what I read here. They're going to further bury this mold. Okay, so they dug that hole by hand. If you've ever dug a hole, it's not easy. Whether they dug it or emptied it. Okay, so now he's measuring the metal. Holy crap. So if any of you have ever dealt with a crucible, they're extremely heavy. This guy just tossed it in there like he was a Yeti. I don't know. I mean, it used to take two of us to get those on a little tipper. I don't know how he just did this. I mean, that dude's cut from leather. So their furnace is in the floor. This is the molds that they buried. Oh, they didn't show the pouring. Oh, here we go. Look at this. So they expanded their gate here, which I was worried about. And usually you have to have an extra volume here to let the metal, let's just for simple terms say, stabilize before it enters the mold. And when the bronze is going in, air has to escape in another way. But what I want you to see is these guys are incredibly close to this. And this is, you know, what, 1100 degrees? It is glowing hot. You cannot tell in black and white how hot this is. This guy's got like tennis shoes on, no protection, no anything, no gloves. I mean, when I was in art school, there was a kid that I was friends with, and he had a terrible burn, and he got burned from the foundry where somebody dropped one of these, and the metal hit, and then it shot up, because, you know, when you drop a glass of water, it launches, and that landed down his back. And sometimes hot metal, you can run your hand right through it because it just doesn't react that fast. But because he was wearing clothing, it stuck to the clothing. It was terrible. And I'm sure these guys got, I'm sure they took some hits. That is. So they have a crane holding the weight, but these guys are controlling the tip. All in the trash. You got to be careful when you do that. Hit the other guy in the head, whatever. Okay, so now you see all this spider web here. That's all bronze also. That's how they controlled the metal would go in here, come down here, but it had to have an escape route to come, the air to come back up here. Yeah, so he's just going to bust off the sprues and the gates. That'll get remelted at some point. It'll create some impurities, but the metal was valuable. No saw, he just hit it with a chisel. Okay, he's leaning over a pool of acid. And he looks pretty chill about it. I went to an electroplating factory I used to work at for doing some projects, and I remember there's these walkways above these pools, and the old man that was showing me the place, he said, "Don't fall in." No waiver, just total old school. You're responsible for yourself. Don't be stupid. Now you're allowed to be stupid. It's like, oh, someone else will make up for my stupidity. The ER will make up for my stupidity. My wife will make up for my stupidity. Yeah, not now, not then. Okay, so it's dissolved. A lot of the, what's that?
It's smoking, doing
Yeah, oh yeah, I know. To me, this is really telling. You got 7 guys here, and these are the key guys that move the whole show forward. I mean, this foundry could handle 1 job at a time. I mean, I wonder what it cost. This is not, they were pretty clean. Look over here. This is probably more normal stuff, but foundries ran out of storage. That wall has no insulation, a little bit of electric power here, but furnaces, bare bones. So this piece now, they're checking the fit. This leg is you can see this, I don't know what to call it, a flange, a collar, something like that. That is what's going to nest into the body of the horse. And this piece here must be relevant to the soldering later. I don't know. I never soldered, so I don't know. We're about to find out. Okay. Now, they've already drilled these holes. Wait till you see. It's a pretty good fit. So do you know what he's doing right there is he's taking a wire tool to scratch where this hole touches the flange that I just pointed out before, because he has to drill another hole through the flange. So this is just like using a pencil, but he's scratching the metal. See this piece of wire here? So now what he's doing is, I don't know what this tool is called, but he's denting the metal because he has to start a really Is it a punch tool? Okay, thank you. And he's got to start a big drill bit, so he's got to dent it in a little bit. But look at the size of this flange. Okay. So he put a wood block in this hand here, and they have a hand drill here. He's setting it up. He's attaching the chuck to this C-clamp type of thing. It's a ratchet drill. Look at that. Here's what's happening, if anybody cares. So they're drilling like with a socket wrench, and then this guy up here is tightening it down. So they 10 times tighten, 10 times tighten. Eventually they're going to drill through this bronze. Bronze is pretty soft, but it's not easy work. Come on. And they would have to do, what, 100 or some of those? It just didn't matter. He just did it. Bitching about it wouldn't do anything. He said, get out of the camera. What do we got? We got legs. You see how everything is numbered or identified? I'm not quite sure why. I mean, it's pretty obvious where it goes, but this is incredible. They just did it, you know. I don't think they made excuses. That's a pretty fussy fit. That metal cannot be warped. And if it is, they have to hit it by hand. That's a money moment right there. Yeah, send in the skinny guy. Now he's got to pin this mofo. What does this fly? Okay, come on, buzzy. Look at where he's at. He's basically in the middle of a giant bell tower. He's surrounded by metal, and what's he doing? He's hitting it with a hammer, and he's got nothing in his ears. Could you imagine? It's like, kill me now. We're too soft, you know? I don't want to be like this. For one, I would have stuffed some newspaper in my ears. I mean, there's a level of macho that probably existed in this environment that they were expected to keep up with culturally, and that still is, if you've been on construction sites, and I can tell stories about that, it still exists today, that stupid protection is acceptable. And I mean, if you wear, you know, if you're trying to be too safe, you look like you're soft. And I'm like, I would like to look smart. Yeah, that dude's tired. I mean, how do you sleep at night? Yeah. And another piece. Here we go. They've got all these joints, pins lined up. Get your finger out of the way. This I have no experience with. I mean, it just pours right off here. There's in the joint, there's probably some sort of flux that allows it to really permeate. But I think what you're not seeing is the metal around it had to be warm also. And I'm not quite sure how they did that. As far as I know, you have to preheat your surrounding area or else it won't melt together. It won't solder well. This is fascinating too. This stick right here is helping him. The one guy's holding the mini crucible, but that stick allows him to kind of pivot this to pour it. I mean, these are all simple moves, but it's neat to see how they did it back then. Yeah, no glasses, no gloves. Catch the extra right there.
His hand is just right next to it.
Right next to it. Yeah, to be like. So this statue is going to be on the side for a long time because they don't have any grinding wheels. They have files. So they're going to chisel and file, and then they got to chase in. What's called chasing is when you use that, what'd you call it, that tool? The punch tool to create the texture over the line and to match that. That texture is matched by hand. You got this guy over here going nuts. That arm's heavy right here. And then they're gonna put the pins in. So there's a lot missing, but it's fascinating to me. Just the idea of the timeline is that they knew that this would be at the foundry for a year and a half, 2 years. I don't know how long this took, 7 guys, maybe more. I mean, just to build that crate, you know, it's probably like a 1,000-year-old redwood they cut down to make that deliverable. It's amazing. All these guys, who calculated what it would cost? It's a government contract. That's clean. There it goes. So I don't know, some of you who are new to the channel, maybe you haven't dived into some of my other platforms. michaeljoyart.com, I'm a digital collage artist as well, as you'll see my sculptures there. But this era of the turn of the century, I loved mashing up these digital collages, and I did several of them with, I think even I have one of this statue, or one very similar to it. And for me, just the framework of daily actions creates what today is such a surrealistic environment. And the collages that I create are very surreal and whimsical and fantastical. For those of you interested, it's really worth a look. There's a couple thousand of them there. I mean, I kind of went to it, but this is, I feel like I'm watching what some of the pictures that I worked from the Library of Congress to make my collages is just happening right in front of me. I love it. One umbrella, everyone else gets soaked. That must have been the one woman. They gave her the umbrella. That's as it should be. Huzzah. So So here's what I want to say about this. I wish I could find more old videos because there is a story in these aside just from people building things. And you got people building pieces of shit. You know, I see people building these tree houses and they can barely cut a piece of wood. I'm not impressed. I mean, it's fun to have in the background. I mean, you guys play this stuff in the editing suite. But the build videos that are about somebody who already knows what they're doing, they're not just experimenting. I treasure those moments. The internet is full of people doing something for the first time. It's okay, but this is fantastic. The trouble is the master crafts people are often too busy to make videos. It's unfortunate. Even people in the comments have been saying, oh, you're gonna make your molds. I'm like, you guys, I mean, what kind of time do you think I have? You know, it's lucky enough to be able to sit down and do this. It's hard. This is where the chain of learning kind of falls short. But if I could find more of these videos, I would love to invite other experts in and catch some dialogue about it. So these guys are long dead and gone, but I high-five them, their hard work that they did to feed their families, and the artwork that survives their life. So fantastic. 1922. We went back 100 years today, you guys. Thanks for watching. You ready? Let's go.
Why do you do this weird thing?
Kay told me to.
It's like lab or like,
Oh,
something changed.
no pooping? Okay. What the fuck? Okay. Oh my God. This is going to end up haunting me. All right, here we go.